So, hello everyone, and welcome to today's Sutta class. We will start as usual with the Namo Tassa. Feel free to join in if you like. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So, welcome everyone to today's Sutta class. Today we are reading the Bāhitika Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya number 88. In English, it is called The Cloak by Bhikkhu Bodhi, or also translated as The Imported Cloth by Bhante Sujato. So, this is a very beautiful sutta. I think it is a conversation between the Venerable Ananda and King Pasenadi of Kosala. And of course, King Pasenadi of Kosala is here again. And I feel like in the last few weeks, we have read a lot of suttas that feature King Pasenadi. That is not deliberate. I didn't choose it that way. It just happened. It's a coincidence. But anyway, here he is again. And I think this is a very beautiful sutta, also very relatable, because in this sutta, King Pasenadi comes to the Venerable Ananda, and King Pasenadi asks this question, whether or not it ever happens to the Buddha that he is criticized or blamed or censured by other people. So obviously, King Pasenadi, like so many of us, I think, has reflected on this issue, and obviously he likes to be liked by other people, loved by other people. He wants to have other people's approval, and he doesn't like to be criticized or blamed. And so obviously he has reflected on this issue, and he thought, well, there is the Buddha. He is fully enlightened. He's perfect. He is the perfected one. So everybody should love him, and everybody should like him, and he should never be criticized. And then he comes to the Venerable Ananda and asks this question, whether or not people could potentially find fault with the Buddha or criticize him. And I think it's very interesting how Ananda replies to that. And I think this is also very relatable, of course, because I feel like so many of us want to have other people's approval, and we want to be liked by our friends and our social network. And of course, we don't like to be criticized. So I feel like this is a really, really beautiful and very interesting sutta. So without further ado, let's start reading. I have put a link in the live chat as usual to Bhante Sujato's translation if you want to read along. I will be reading from Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. So, thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Savatthi, in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's park. Then, when it was morning, the Venerable Ananda dressed, and taking his bowl and outer robe, went into Savatthi for alms. When he had wandered for alms in Savatthi, and had returned from his alms round, after his meal, he went to the eastern park, to the palace of Migara's mother, for the day's abiding. So here we have the typical introduction of a sutta. They're all in Savatthi. Ananda has gone on alms round, and now he wants to spend the rest of the day in meditation in the monastery that was donated by the lay woman Visakha, also known as Migara's mother. And so now on that occasion, King Pasenadi of Kosala had mounted the elephant Eka Pundarika and was riding out from Savatthi at midday. He saw the Venerable Ananda coming in the distance and asked the minister Sirivata, "That is the Venerable Ananda, is it not?" "Yes, sire, that is the Venerable Ananda." Then King Pasenadi of Kosala told a man, "Come, good man, go to the Venerable Ananda and pay homage in my name with your head at his feet, saying, 'Venerable Sir, King Pasenadi of Kosala pays homage with his head at the Venerable Ananda's feet.' then say this: Venerable Sir, if the Venerable Ananda has no urgent business, perhaps the Venerable Ananda would wait a moment out of compassion. So here we have Ananda on the way to the park for his meditation, and he happens to come across King Pasenadi of Kosala, who is riding around on his elephant, and King Pasenadi recognizes Ananda, and he's very happy, and of course he is also very respectful. He pays respect and now wants to have a brief conversation with the Venerable Ananda. And here, of course, we can also see the status that monastics enjoyed, or spiritual seekers, renunciants in general, not only Buddhist monastics, but all kinds of spiritual practitioners enjoyed in the society of back in the day. And that even kings were highly respectful of them. They didn't belong to ordinary society. They were not subject of the king or subject to the king. So they were outside of ordinary society, and even the king would bow down to them and be very respectful to them. And we see that in other suttas as well, whether they are men or women, as long as they are spiritual practitioners, the kings would bow to them and would be very, very respectful and would support them in their spiritual practice, because that was seen as so special and that was regarded so highly that even kings would bow to them and pay homage to them. So here in this case, of course, King Pasenadi also personally knows Ananda. He recognizes him straight away, and so he is very interested to have a conversation. So, yes, sire, the man replied, and he went to the Venerable Ananda, and after paying homage to him, he stood at one side and said to the Venerable Ananda, Venerable Sir, King Pasenadi of Kosala pays homage with his head at the Venerable Ananda's feet. And he says this: Venerable Sir, if the Venerable Ananda has no urgent business, perhaps the Venerable Ananda would wait a moment out of compassion. The Venerable Ananda consented in silence. Then King Pasenadi went by elephant as far as the elephant could go, and then he dismounted and went to the Venerable Ananda on foot. After paying homage to him, he stood at one side and said to the Venerable Ananda, If, Venerable Sir, the Venerable Ananda has no urgent business, it would be good if you would go to the bank of the river Achiravati out of compassion. The Venerable Ananda consented in silence. So now King Pasenadi personally goes to Ananda and pays respect again. And of course, now that he wants to have a conversation, they can't do that in the middle of the city where it's very loud and very busy and very noisy and you can't really sit down. So they go to a quiet place. They go to the bank of a river, the river Achiravati, and they have their conversation there. So the Venerable Ananda went to the bank of the river Achiravati and sat down at the root of a tree on a seat made ready. Then King Pasenadi went by elephant as far as the elephant could go, and then he dismounted and went to the Venerable Ananda on foot. After paying homage to him, he stood at one side and said to the Venerable Ananda, Here, Venerable Sir, is an elephant rug. Let the Venerable Ananda be seated on it. So again, this is a sign of respect. King Pasenadi is offering Ananda his own seat, an elephant rug, and elephants, of course, were considered very, very precious and very, very special animals. So sitting on an elephant rug would have been like a very high honor, a very special kind of seat. And King Pasenadi is offering that to Ananda, but Ananda is not all that interested in it. And he says, There's no need, great king, sit down. I'm sitting on my own mat. And then King Pasenadi of Kosala sat down on a seat made ready and said, Venerable Ananda, would the Blessed One behave with the body in such a way that he could be censured by recluses and Brahmins? So now King Pasenadi opens the conversation with this question. And he asks, would the Buddha, who obviously is an arahant, he's fully enlightened, he is the perfected one, would he ever act in such a way that other people might find fault with him? And so the first thing that King Pasenadi is asking about the Buddha's behavior with the body, later on we will see he will ask the same question about his behavior by speech and his behavior with the mind. So he's asking this question, obviously. This is something that, as I mentioned before, seems to be very at the forefront of King Pasenadi's mind, something that he thinks about a lot, because obviously as the king, he has to govern like a huge, a large amount of people, and a large range of very different people, very different characters, people from all walks of life. And all of them have some kind of expectation towards him. He's a very, very public figure. So obviously for him, it's very easy to be criticized. He just has to interact with a lot of people. And for a king, obviously, it's important that he is liked by the people. So obviously, this is something that is important to King Pasenadi to think about how you can be agreeable to a lot of people. And if somebody who is perfected might still be criticized by people. And I think probably he expects Ananda to say, no, the Buddha is so perfect, he would never be criticized by anybody. But of course, this is not what the Venerable Ananda answers. So Ananda answers, Great King, the Blessed One would not behave with the body in such a way that he could be censored by wise recluses and Brahmins. And King Pasenadi asks, would the Blessed One Venerable Ananda behave with speech or behave with the mind in such a way that he could be censured by recluses and Brahmins? And Ananda says, Great King, the Blessed One would not behave with speech or behave with the mind in such a way that he could be censured by wise recluses and Brahmins. So King Pasenadi just asks if the Buddha could in general be criticized by just random people, random spiritual practitioners, recluses and Brahmins. And Ananda says, well, if they are wise people, they would not criticize the Buddha. But of course, so Ananda makes this distinction between people who are wise and people who are stupid or who are unwise. And so for people who are wise, they know what is wholesome, they know what is unwholesome. They know which kind of behavior is appropriate, and such people would not criticize the Buddha, because the Buddha, being fully accomplished, being fully enlightened, obviously is a very virtuous, very ethical person. And so wise people would not criticize him. But stupid people or unwise people or foolish people might still criticize the Buddha, because such people cannot see what is, or cannot properly differentiate between what is wholesome, what is unwholesome, what is skillful, what is unskillful. And such people might still find fault, because they have obviously different expectations of what is appropriate behavior, or or maybe their judgment might be clouded by greed, hatred, and delusion. So they think the Buddha should behave in a way that is pleasing to them, when obviously that would not be the most skillful kind of action in that particular situation. And so for that reason, it is said in so many suttas, it is very important that we associate with wise people, that we do not associate with foolish people, because, most of us, I think, are somewhat influenced by the people around us. We want to be liked by others. We don't want to be criticized all the time. We don't want people to nitpick on us. We don't want people to find fault with us all the time. So other people do have some kind of influence over our behavior in those cases. For some people more, for some people less. Some people are more independent than others. But for most people, unless they're fully enlightened, other people have some kind of influence over them, because we all live in social networks. And because other people have some kind of influence on our behavior, it is very important that we wisely choose the people that we live with. And for that reason, also in other suttas, for example, the Buddha has said that spiritual friendship is so important. It is the whole of the spiritual practice, because other people, if we have good people around us, they will encourage us in doing what is skillful and what is beneficial, and they will discourage us from doing what is unbeneficial or unwholesome. Whereas if we have unskillful people around us, they will want to do things that just strengthen our defilements, that strengthen greed, hatred, and delusion. They will encourage us to do unwholesome stuff, to create bad karma, and that will, of course, cause obstructions on our spiritual path. And for that reason, the environment, the social groups, the social networks that we form around us is so important. And for example, we see that in so many suttas. There's also the Mangala Sutta, the very famous Paritta, which in the very first line of that Mangala Sutta, it says, not to be around fools, but to be in company with the wise, that is the highest blessing. Because like other people have so much influence on us that it's such a blessing to have good people around us who can help us on the spiritual path and encourage us. And not to let us be influenced by foolish people around us. So this is what Ananda points out here. Even the Buddha can still be criticized by people because some people just are foolish and they can't properly differentiate between what is right and what is wrong and what is skillful and what is unskillful. And so King Pasenadi hears this answer and he's greatly delighted, and he says, "It is wonderful, Venerable Sir, it is marvelous. For what we were unable to accomplish with a question has been accomplished by the Venerable Ananda with the answer to the question. We do not recognize anything of value in the praise and blame of others, spoken by foolish, ignorant persons who speak without having investigated and evaluated. But we recognize as valuable the praise and blame of others spoken by wise, intelligent, and sagacious persons who speak after having investigated and evaluated." So King Pasenadi is not upset that Ananda changed his question or that Ananda corrected his question. He is very joyful, he rejoices, he recognizes that he asked the wrong question, and he's very happy that Ananda answered the way he answered. And then now he also changed his own mind. Before that, he just wanted to have approval from other people in general, but now he recognizes that the praise and blame of people who are foolish is totally meaningless. So you should not run after approval from such people, because such people don't investigate a situation properly. They don't fully understand all the circumstances, so they cannot properly understand what is appropriate and what is wholesome to do there. Whereas people who are wise and intelligent, they investigate the situation, they properly understand what's going on, and so they can properly judge if a behavior was skillful or unskillful. And so their feedback is actually valuable. And we also see in the question that King Pasenadi asks first, he asks if the Buddha could ever be censored by recluses and Brahmins. King Pasenadi is worried about being criticized or being put down or other people finding fault with him. But now in this answer, he recognizes that both praise and blame from wise people can be helpful. So even if you get criticized by wise people, that is helpful, because now you know where your blind spot is, where your fault is, where something is that you could improve, where you're still under the sway of a defilement that you need to let go. So those wise people can actually help you find those blind spots and can help you to develop on the path. And of course, if they praise you, then you see there's something that is really wholesome and valuable and something that you could strengthen and develop more. So whether they praise you or blame you, feedback from wise people is always good. So even if they criticize you, even that is valuable, even though it might at first be a little bit uncomfortable. So, and then King Pasenadi asks a further question, and he says, "Now, Venerable Ananda, what kind of bodily behavior is censured by wise recluses and Brahmins?" And so later on in the sutta, he will ask exactly the same question, or they will go through exactly the same question and answer for verbal behavior and mental behavior. So I'm just going to read all three together so that we don't have to go through all of three of them like 3 times. So I'll include that all here. So Ananda answers, "Any bodily, verbal, or mental behavior that is unwholesome, great king." Now, Venerable Ananda, what kind of bodily, verbal, and mental behavior is unwholesome? Any behavior that is blameworthy, great king. Now, Venerable Ananda, what kind of behavior is blameworthy? Any behavior that brings affliction, great king. Now, Venerable Ananda, what kind of behavior brings affliction? Any behavior that has painful results, great king. Now, Venerable Ananda, what kind of behavior has painful results? Any bodily, verbal, or mental behavior, great king, that leads to one's own affliction, or to the affliction of others, or to the affliction of both, and on account of which unwholesome states increase, unwholesome states diminish. Such bodily behavior is censured by wise recluses and Brahmins, great king. So now King Pasenadi asks a bit more like a specific question. He wants to know exactly what kind of behavior would wise people praise or would wise people blame, especially what kind of behavior would they blame. And the answer, Ananda's answer, is quite interesting because he gives a list of various things that seem almost like synonyms. Behavior that is unwholesome, that is blameworthy, that brings affliction, that it has painful results, and so on. And so we see that Ananda doesn't give a very specific answer. So Ananda doesn't say, well, if you break the 5 precepts, for example, that would be unwholesome, or if, or he doesn't really point to any specific action as such. And at this point, we have to assume that this is fairly late in the Buddha's dispensation already. So King Pasenadi has been around Buddhists for quite a while. So King Pasenadi is probably quite familiar with the 5 precepts, the 8 precepts, and general Buddhist teachings. So Ananda maybe doesn't see a need to talk to him about the 5 precepts again, because King Pasenadi would be well acquainted with that already. And so Ananda answers on a different level. So Ananda doesn't just points out very specific kinds of behavior, but Ananda gives him the general principle, how you can evaluate any kind of action. Any kind of action that maybe doesn't come under the umbrella of the 5 precepts. So, of course, in daily life, there are many, many situations that don't really involve any of the 5 precepts. But still, you might want to know, is that now wholesome or is it unwholesome? And so Ananda says, well, unwholesome or blameworthy means that it brings you suffering. It brings you painful results. And so you can reflect, does it bring suffering to myself? Does it bring suffering to others? Does it bring suffering to both? And also reflect, like on the outside, what happens to me and to the people around me, or to any kind of being in samsara. And also mentally inside myself, what happens? Do my unwholesome states increase? Do my defilements increase? Am I making a lot of bad karma? Am I creating more greed, hatred, and delusion in my mind? Or am I diminishing my wholesome states? So am I creating blockages? Am I weakening my mindfulness? Am I weakening my right effort? Am I weakening my samadhi or any of my other important factors of the practice path, of the Buddhist path? Is any of this weakened if I act in such and such a way? And so both, does it create affliction for myself and others on the outside? Does it create more suffering in the world? And also, how do I internally react to this? What kind of qualities does this create in my mind, the good ones or the bad ones? And so this is how you can evaluate any kind of action, even if it doesn't have any kind of relation with, let's say, the 5 precepts and so on. And in this way, now, this is kind of a little bit of a higher teaching, more like, of course, more difficult to understand, but also a little bit broader than just teaching, for example, about the 5 precepts. But as I mentioned, King Pasenadi already has, at this point, has gotten quite a few teachings from the Buddha and from Ananda, because this is fairly late in the Buddha's dispensation already. And so Ananda says, if you act in this way, then this kind of behavior is censured by wise recluses and Brahmins, great king. And then King Pasenadi asks a further question, and he says, now, Venerable Ananda, does the Blessed One praise only the abandoning of all unwholesome states? And Ananda says, the Tathagata, great king, has abandoned all unwholesome states, and he possesses wholesome states. So King Pasenadi is asking, well, does the Buddha only talk about all this? Does he just praise this abandoning of all unwholesome states? And Ananda says, well, no, the Buddha has actually put this into practice, and he has actually really, really abandoned all the unwholesome states, and he has developed all the wholesome states. So he's not only just randomly talking about this, he has actually put it into practice. He's not just talking, he's actually walking the talk, he's actually doing what he's saying, and he has already finished all this work. So he knows that this works, and he knows that this has beneficial results. So he has actually accomplished everything that was to be accomplished. And now they have this exact same conversation in the opposite way, about behavior that is not censured by wise recluses and Brahmins. So we can go through this a little bit quicker, I think. And so King Pasenadi asks, now Venerable Ananda, what kind of bodily, verbal, or mental behavior is uncensured by wise recluses and Brahmins? And Ananda says, any bodily, verbal, or mental behavior that is blameless, great king. Now, Venerable Ananda, what kind of bodily, verbal, or mental behavior is blameless? Any behavior that does not bring affliction, great king. Now, Venerable Ananda, what kind of behavior does not bring affliction? Any behavior that has pleasant results, great king. Now, Venerable Ananda, what kind of behavior has pleasant results? Any behavior, great king, that does not lead to one's own affliction or to the affliction of others or to the affliction of both, and on account of which unwholesome states diminish and wholesome states increase. Such bodily, verbal, and mental behavior, great king, is uncensured by wise recluses and Brahmins. So again, we have the same kind of conversation. Again, Ananda starts talking about behavior that is wholesome, that is blameless, that does not lead to suffering, and that has pleasant results, and that also doesn't lead to suffering for oneself, for others, or for both, and also where our internal development is supported, where our unwholesome states, our defilements, our greed, hatred, and delusion diminish, and where all our wholesome qualities start to grow and start to develop, or even come to full fruition, come to full completion. And that, of course, is the behavior that is praised or uncensured by wise recluses and Brahmins. And I think it's fairly easy to understand. One point that I wanted to point out is that Ananda says, well, any behavior that is wholesome and that is blameless also has pleasant results. And of course, when we talk about those pleasant results, then we have to be clear what that means. So for example, we could think if we just, let's say, eat an ice cream, then that has pleasant results because it's sweet and it tastes nice and we feel happy. But that's not what is meant here, because obviously if we eat an ice cream with attachment, then that could strengthen our greed. And in the long run, that would obviously, that like short term, obviously that has a pleasant result because it tastes nice. But in the long term, it leads to our affliction because it has strengthened our greed, our attachment, and that has created delusion in our mind, and it has strengthened unwholesome states and has weakened our wholesome states of contentment, of renunciation, and so on. And of course, we could, for example, even take this to the next level. We could steal someone else's ice cream. We could even break the second precept, and we have stolen something. And of course, now we are happy because we have this item, we have this nice ice cream or whatever we have stolen. And we feel like this has led to pleasant results. But of course, that is just delusion speaking. And again, in the long run, that was really bad karma, and that would lead really to our affliction. And even in the short term, it has led to the affliction of others because that other person now no longer has that item and is obviously quite upset about that. So when Ananda talks about pleasant results, he means like we have to take a long-term perspective. We really have to see what are the consequences of that action, and does it actually have long-term pleasant effects, or is it just a short-term like dopamine hit because we have this pleasant ice cream, and in the long term it will actually lead to suffering. So that kind of thing would not be included in what Ananda here calls wholesome or blameless, even though it like may have a little bit of a pleasant result for a brief moment. So that's not what is meant here, obviously. So still the qualifications apply, or the conditions apply, that it shouldn't lead to one's own affliction or the affliction of others, and it needs to increase our wholesome qualities and diminish our unwholesome qualities. So, and then King Pasenadi again asks similar question to what he asked before, and he says, now Venerable Ananda, does the Blessed One praise only the undertaking of all wholesome states? And Ananda says, the Tathagata, great king, has abandoned all unwholesome states and possesses wholesome states. So again, King Pasenadi asks, does the Buddha only talk about this? And Ananda says, well, no, he doesn't only talk about this. He has actually accomplished this, like fully accomplished this. And he has totally and completely abandoned all unwholesome states, and he fully possesses all wholesome states. So again, he's putting into practice what he is teaching. And for that reason, again, wise people would praise him and would not censure him, because he has actually done what he talks about. And now King Pasenadi is really happy and rejoices in this conversation. And he says, it is wonderful, Venerable Sir. It is marvelous how well that has been expressed by the Venerable Ananda. And we are satisfied and pleased by what has been so well expressed by him. Venerable Sir, we are so satisfied and pleased with what has been so well expressed by the Venerable Ananda, that if the elephant treasure were allowed to him, we would give it to him. If the horse treasure were allowed to him, we would give it to him. If the boon of a village were allowed to him, we would give it to him. But we know, Venerable Sir, that these are not allowable for the Venerable Ananda. But there is this cloak of mine, Venerable Sir, which was sent to me packed in a royal umbrella case by King Ajatasattu of Magadha, 16 hands long and 8 hands wide. Let the Venerable Ananda accept it out of compassion. So King Pasenadi is very happy with this Dhamma talk, and he wants to really show his gratitude for this very special teaching that is very close to him, very dear to him. And he wants to show that with a really big present to the Venerable Ananda. He wants to really show that how overjoyed he is with this teaching. And so he says, well, I'd like to give you an elephant, but I know you can't accept an elephant, and you also can't accept a horse, because obviously monastics cannot accept other beings, including animals. And then King Pasenadi thinks about offering a whole village to Ananda. And of course, monastics cannot accept that either. So back in the day, it was common for a king to give a village to somebody who has given a very big service to him, let's say a minister, or let's say some other very outstanding person that has really supported the king in some way. And so that person would then basically possess that village, so they would be entitled to all the revenues and to taxes from that village. And also the people who live in that village would sort of have to do work for them. So having a boon of a village means that you get a lot of money, and you also have people working for you. And obviously that is not allowed for monastics either. But monastics can accept the 4 requisites, and especially here in this case, a cloth requisite. And cloth was difficult to get for monastics back in the day. Cloth was very expensive, very hard to get. And so King Pasenadi has this very special cloth. And this cloak, which seems to be really enormously large. So I don't know how King Pasenadi really wore this. It must have had a very long train that was trailing behind him or something. But obviously, him being a king, this is also a status symbol, because cloth was expensive. So if you have this really amazing and very large cloth, that really shows that you have very high status, because you can afford to have such a huge cloak. And so this is a very special one. Also, it seems to have been a royal gift. So another king, King Ajatasattu of Magadha, has sent this to him. And again, this King Ajatasattu is the successor of King Bimbisara. He was the son of King Bimbisara, and he killed his father to take over the throne. And this is again one indication why the sutta takes place fairly late in the Buddha's dispensation, because in the early stages of the Buddha's dispensation, King Bimbisara was still king of Magadha. So we see that this is towards the later stages in the Buddha's teaching career, which is why King Pasenadi already has a good knowledge of Buddhist teachings, which is why Ananda doesn't need to teach him about 5 precepts, for example, and which is also why he is very well acquainted with the Venerable Ananda and immediately recognizes him in the beginning when he's passing by on his elephant. And so now he's trying to offer this very large, very expensive cloak to the Venerable Ananda that is so special that it was given to him by another king. Packaged in a royal umbrella case, so a very special packaging. I'm not exactly sure what an umbrella case means and why you would put a cloth in it, but obviously it just means that it was a very, very special kind of cloth. So Ananda says, "It is not necessary, great king. My triple robe is complete." And the king says, "Venerable sir, this river Achiravati has been seen both by the Venerable Ananda and by ourselves when a great cloud has rained heavily on the mountains. Then this river Achiravati overflows both its banks. So too, Venerable sir, the Venerable Ananda can make a triple robe for himself out of this cloak, and can share out his old triple robe among his companions in the holy life. In this way, our offering will overflow. Venerable sir, let the Venerable Ananda accept the cloak." So King Pasenadi is very determined to show his gratitude and to offer this cloak. And so he tells Ananda, just, accept it, make a new robe, triple robe for yourself, and give your old one to others. And so in this way, my generosity will spread and more people can benefit, and it would just be good for everybody. I can make all this merit, and I can even make more merit because other people also benefit. And so here, this passage is also very interesting from a Vinaya standpoint, so from the standpoint of monastic rules. Because here it is stated exactly how large this cloak was, namely 16 hands long and 8 hands wide. And King Pasenadi obviously thinks that Ananda can make a triple robe out of this. So a triple robe means a standard set of robes for monks. So monks usually had 3 robes, nuns had 5 robes, and the 3 robes that monks had was one lower robe, which is like, let's say, a skirt, and then an upper robe, which is like this one that I'm wearing that covers the whole body, and then what we call a sangati, which is like this very large upper robe, but double layered so that you can wear it in winter when it's cold. And so basically it's like having 4 robes because the sangati is double layered, so it's like 2 robes sewn together, so basically 4 robes in total. And back in the day, monastics, both monks and nuns, used to have only one set of robes. Nowadays, some monks and nuns still do that. Many monks and nuns have multiple sets of robes because it's just much easier. If you want to wash your stuff, then you can just wash one set while you wear the other. But back in the day, cloth was very, very rare, was very, very special and expensive. So people used to have only one set of robes. And for that reason, Ananda says, I already have a set, so I actually don't need another one. But here we see King Pasenadi thinks that this very large cloak of his, which is 16 by 8 hands long and wide, is sufficient for making a whole set of 4 robes for a monastic, or of 3 robes, one of them being double, for a monastic. And in the Vinaya, we also have the sizes of those robes, and the maximum size that a robe can be is 9 by 6. So if you make 4 robes that are 9 by 6, obviously, that would be much, much larger than this 16 by 8 here. So this really shows us that it's very, very likely that in the Buddha's day, monastics had robes that were much smaller than what we, like the Theravada robes, that what we wear today. Because otherwise the king wouldn't, like that really wouldn't be all that generous if the king offers a piece of cloth and then it turns out it's way too small to actually make this triple robe. So here it seems that King Pasenadi really believes, and Ananda also really believes, that this cloak would easily be sufficient for making a new triple robe, which seems to imply that robes were much smaller then, and they didn't really make robes to the maximum size that was allowed in the Vinaya. And that makes a lot of sense because, as I mentioned, cloth was very expensive back then, so you wouldn't make robes bigger than they needed to be. And so probably the kind of robes that people wore back then are much smaller than what we're wearing today. Probably they're much more similar to, for example, what the Sayales, so the 8 precept nuns in Burma wear nowadays, or even what in Mahayana traditions, what they wear is their Sangati, which is also much smaller than ours. So that is probably much more similar to the actual size that they were using back in the day. And one of the indications why we think that they wore much smaller robes is this passage here in this text. So the king wants Ananda to make a triple robe out of this expensive royal cloak. And so now at this point, the Venerable Ananda accepted the cloak. Then King Pasenadi of Kosala said, "And now, Venerable Sir, we depart, we are busy and have much to do." And Ananda says, "You may go, great king, at your own convenience." Then King Pasenadi of Kosala, having delighted and rejoiced in the Venerable Ananda's words, rose from his seat, and after paying homage to the Venerable Ananda, keeping him on his right, he departed. Then soon after he had left, the Venerable Ananda went to the Blessed One, and after paying homage to him, he sat down at one side, related to him his entire conversation with King Pasenadi of Kosala, and presented the cloak to the Blessed One. Then the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus. "It is a gain, bhikkhus, for King Pasenadi of Kosala. It is a great gain for King Pasenadi of Kosala that he had the opportunity of seeing and paying respect to Ananda." So now the king departs. Ananda tells the Buddha what happened. And of course, he thinks that this really very, very special cloak, this royal garment, basically, is much more suitable for the Buddha than for himself. So he offers this robe to the Buddha. And the Buddha praises him for that conversation that he had with King Pasenadi. And he also says, well, King Pasenadi is so fortunate that he had this opportunity of talking with the Venerable Ananda. So again, this is something I think that we also can reflect on and we can rejoice in if we have this opportunity to be around spiritual friends, to get good teachings from others, especially from people who are a little bit more advanced on the path than we are and who can give us Dhamma teachings, then this is something that is very special. It is very, very hard to get in samsara. We are very lucky that we have these opportunities, and we should really reflect on this and we should really rejoice in this. And so this whole conversation that they had about, associating with wise people and being either praised or blamed or just getting feedback from them and getting teachings from them, this is actually why King Pasenadi was questioning about this and was talking about this. It's exactly what he was doing the whole time. Like he was associating with Ananda and he was getting this feedback from a wise person. So this whole sutta is basically putting into practice its own teaching. And so the Buddha praises this whole thing and really points out how fortunate people are when they have this opportunity of associating with monastics that can give teachings or that are fairly accomplished on the path. And so that is what the Blessed One said. The bhikkhus were satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. So this is the Bāhitika Sutta, the end of our sutta for today. I hope you enjoyed it. It was talking about how to interact with a social group, what to do if we always feel like we want other people's approval, when other people criticize us, and what is the right approach there, and how to wisely choose the people that we surround ourselves with. So now if you have any questions or comments, then please type them in the live chat and I will see if I can answer them. So let's have a look. Welcome to all the venerables that have joined in. Venerable Kansarati, very nice to see you, and also Ayati Sarani. So good to see you. Thank you so much for joining in. And I just saw a question from Anagarika Sunya, nice to see you. So she says, how are painful results to be understood? Many cases of blame arise from someone having painful mental results that they blame on us instead of their own hindrances. So, well, again, many people might blame us, but those wouldn't be the wise people. Like if people still are under the sway of their own hindrances and their own defilements and delusions, and they can't properly understand the situation, then those are those unwise people on whose opinion shouldn't matter too much to us. So this is exactly the question that King Pasenadi asked in the beginning. Would somebody who's fully enlightened still be censured by recluses and Brahmins? And Ananda says, well, the only opinion that matters is the opinion of wise people. So if people are still under the sway of delusions, then they wouldn't count as wise people. So if we are blamed by such people, then we shouldn't pay too much attention to that. But of course, criticism in general is unpleasant. And so when we have to hear that, we might still suffer from that if we are not fully enlightened, or at least anagamis. We might still suffer from that because we don't like to hear unpleasant words. But if we have enough wisdom, then we can reflect on is this actually true? And are these actually wise people? And should I actually listen to what they have to say? And is this helpful to me? And generally, is it helpful for me to be around such people? Is it helpful to me to be influenced by such people? And if we see that they are not particularly skillful, then we shouldn't let ourselves be influenced by them, because that will just drag us down. And if we are too much influenced by such people, then of course they will encourage us in doing unwholesome stuff, and they will discourage us from doing wholesome stuff, and that would just create a huge barrier to our practice. And for that reason, well, the Buddha says, surround yourself with good people and spiritual, like friends and so on. And it is a huge blessing if you're not surrounded by foolish people. And Sud says, Dear Aya, was King Pasenadi a very advanced spiritual practitioner? Is there any indication of him attaining any spiritual attainments? So no, King Pasenadi was somebody who was interested in the Buddha's teaching. He was very respectful to the Buddha, but he did not attain any kind of higher attainment. So unlike, for example, King Bimbisara, who became a stream enterer, King Pasenadi was always just an ordinary lay follower, and he enjoyed having conversations with the Buddha, but he did not actually have any higher kinds of attainments. And then Celestino asks, the profound teaching for me was about the thoughts, because speech and action come from them. However, what about evaluating the intention before letting any thought come in the mind? So I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly. I agree with you that thoughts basically are the forerunner of our speech and our action. So obviously, if we only have wholesome thoughts, then all our speech and all our action will also be wholesome. I think it's really, really difficult to evaluate the intention before we let any thoughts arise, because you need to have a very high level of mindfulness and very high level of samadhi to really control your thoughts all the time, for your entire life, 24/7, the whole time. So, of course, if you can do that, then that is great. And then you should evaluate the intention. And then if your intention is wholesome, then obviously all thoughts that will arise from that would also be wholesome, and all bodily and verbal actions would also be wholesome. if and the other in the other way, like if the intention would be unwholesome, then everything that follows from that would also be unwholesome. So if you can evaluate that, that's great. It's just a really, really high bar, and most people probably won't be up to that. So like at whatever stage in the process, you can take note of what you're doing, even if the thought has already arisen. So let's say an unwholesome thought has already arisen. At least notice it at that point, and then stop yourself before you start acting on it with your speech or with your actions. Or if you're in the middle of an action and only then you become mindful that this is unwholesome, then just stop right there. Whenever you notice, just stop right there. Or if even in the middle of speech, you notice like this isn't really wholesome speech, then, just stop talking and try to do better next time. Yeah, if you can evaluate the intention, that's great. If not, then just evaluate whatever action by body, speech, and mind you're doing at the time that you're doing it, and then stop it if it's unwholesome, or practice it more if it is wholesome. So, we have a lot of comments today. Let's go a little bit quicker. So Charles Lee asks, I was raised by constantly criticizing parents and have fear of criticism that leads to avoiding conversation. How can I work with this habit pattern to be less fearful and less sensitive of criticism? So I totally relate, and I think a lot of people relate. And so the most important thing is to understand that basically this fear is an unwholesome habit pattern that you have generated because of the conditioning that you were given. So again, because you were surrounded by unskillful people, by so-called foolish people in the framework of this sutta, you have created foolish mental patterns because that is what the people who you were surrounded with. So you have to undo this conditioning and try to surround yourself with helpful spiritual practitioners. Of course, that is difficult if you're afraid of other people. So you have to go slowly. You can't expect a miracle. This is something that probably you will have to work with over a lengthy period of time. So it's not going to be resolved within a few days or a few weeks. And one other thing that is really, really important in this kind of situation is to practice self-metta, to basically counteract this inner voice that criticizes and puts you down all the time. There is another voice that you cultivate that elevates you, that loves you unconditionally, that just wishes the best for you, that wishes your success. So really practicing the self-metta is very important to be able to overcome this unwholesome conditioning of self-criticism the whole time. And as you practice self-metta, you become more self-confident because you feel better within yourself. You have more self-esteem for yourself. And as you develop more self-esteem, other people's opinions won't matter that much to you anymore. So so you don't have that much fear anymore, and you will naturally become less sensitive of criticism over time. But this is really a journey, and it really takes time. But also understand that many other people are the same as you. And so I think a lot of people can relate to that. And hopefully, as spiritual practitioners, we try to practice metta towards each other as best as we can. Obviously, other people also aren't perfect, so unpleasant things might still happen. But generally, in spiritual communities, people try to be friendly. And so hopefully there is not that much need for fear if you have good people around you. But yeah, see it as a journey, see it as a training, and just, take it step by step. Try to get a little bit better every day, but don't expect a miracle. And Buddha Ruchi says, does the discussion about modern interpretation and adjustment regarding the robes adjust the Vinaya? If monastics can have more than one robe now, why not handle money, cook, etc.? Or did I miss a point? So, no, nobody has changed the Vinaya in regard to the robes. So basically, monastics have one set of robes that is called the official set of robes, and then we have what is called miscellaneous cloth. So any additional cloth requisites, like an extra lower robe or something, would not be an official robe, but it would just be called miscellaneous cloth. And that is allowed in the Vinaya. So it's not that people don't follow Vinaya, it's just that they have added a lot of extra cloth pieces, which is allowed in the Vinaya. And it's not really a modern interpretation or a modern adjustment. This is something that we see happening very early on in the Buddhist dispensation as cloth became more plentiful, probably, and also as the Sangha became more famous and more well supported. This happened probably quite early on after the Buddha's passing. Let's say in the first 100 or 200 years, we see these things coming up in the Vinaya. So even in fairly early Vinaya texts, even though they don't quite go back to the Buddha's time probably, but very, very early texts, people already, like monastics already have more than one set of robes. So this isn't totally modern. And then by the time of the commentaries, the robes have already gotten really, really large. So it's not really modern. This has happened throughout Buddhist history. And as I mentioned, this is sort of allowed in the Vinaya because it's called extra cloth requisites or miscellaneous cloth. And nobody has really redefined the money rules in that way. Like the money rules are quite clear. You cannot handle money. Which doesn't mean that all the monastics don't handle money. Like most monastics do actually handle money nowadays. The ones that do not handle money are very few and far between. But everybody agrees that this is not according to Vinaya. People just say, well, in modern times, it's not really practical. And also many monastics do cook. So yeah, but the thing, like, it's different because the Vinaya is very clear on handling money, but on the cloth requisites, there is a lot of leeway. It's just interesting to see how things that were done in the Buddha's time, and some people really like to go back and do things exactly the way it was done in the Buddha's time. So there are a lot of monastics, and I myself have lived with communities that were experimenting with other robe sizes. I have lived in communities where robes were much, much smaller than what we have now. And that does have advantages and disadvantages. One advantage, for example, is that, of course, you need a lot less cloth. It's much easier to sew if you're making robes. Also, usually in such communities, when they live very simply because they want to live the way the Buddha lived, they don't have washing machines, so you have to wash by hand. And obviously, it's much easier to wash a small robe than a robe that is like twice the size of a bed sheet by hand, because that's just really large and it's really difficult to handle and very difficult to dry. So a lot of monastics are experimenting with these kind of things. And I think it's valid. Like, I think it's very interesting. And not everybody has to do things the same way. And then I'm not sure, is this a question? If a thought of, let's say, anger or frustration arises, but you don't act on it, whether verbally or otherwise, would that create unwholesome results? So yes, it would create some kind of unwholesome results because we have three different kinds of actions. One is the actions by body. Those create strong karma. Then we have actions by speech. Those also create karma. And we have actions by mind, so mental actions, which are thoughts, emotions, and so on. And yes, those also can create karma. So they create karma because if you have anger in your mind, that strengthens your unwholesome tendency of anger. So your hindrances increase, your delusion increases, your hatred increases. And so all these unwholesome states increase, and that's obviously, that is bad karma, because that will block you, or that will create some kind of impediment for your progress on the spiritual path. So mental actions are also creating karma, but they're not quite as strong as, let's say, verbal or bodily actions. Like if you imagine killing somebody, that is very unwholesome. But if you actually kill somebody, like in real life, that is obviously much, much more unwholesome than just thinking about it. So I think that seems to have been the last question for today. So thank you very much for joining in. I hope you enjoyed this talk. I hope it was beneficial for you. And somebody posted a very long comment or question. Let's just briefly have a look before we finish. Intentions from body like pains, scratching, and so on are easier to evaluate because the thinking process is stopped at the perception level. While living in the Dhamma does not allow any unwholesome action, however, the speech process is too fast and is very hard for me to handle in the right way at the moment on the evaluation and discernment basis. Okay, so it seems like you are doing some vipassana practice and you seem to be knowing what you're doing. So if that is beneficial to you, then that's great, and keep on practicing that way. Wonderful. And for today, we will finish as usual with 3 sadhus. Feel free to join if you like. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Have a great rest of the day and have a great week. And I will see you all next Tuesday.